A millionaire marries a ugly beggar for a bet, but what he discovers on their wedding night shocks him. Before we dive into the story, share in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The nightclub buzzed with life, the golden chandeliers casting a warm glow over the room. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and money flowed like water. At the VIP section, where only the wealthiest men sat, Ethan Cole lounged comfortably, his confident smirk never leaving his face. He was the kind of man who had never heard the word no. Handsome, wealthy, and dangerously arrogant, Ethan thrived on challenges, thriving on the reckless dares thrown his way by his so-called friends. Tonight was no different. With expensive whiskey in hand, he listened as his friends goaded him, pushing for something even more outrageous than the last. Then one of them, drunk and grinning wickedly, leaned forward and said, "Ethan, let's see if you're really fearless. I dare you to marry the ugliest woman you can find." The table erupted in laughter, but Ethan simply rolled his eyes. At first, he brushed it off, uninterested in such a ridiculous bet. But when the teasing grew louder, poking at his pride, he leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning. "All right," he said smoothly, eyes gleaming with mischief. "I'll do it. Watch and learn." Amused by his own audacity, he stepped out of the nightclub, his friends trailing behind, eager to see how far he would take the bet. The city streets were still alive, neon lights flickering, cars honking, people moving in and out of bars. Ethan scanned the sidewalks, his sharp gaze searching for the perfect target. Then he saw her. A frail, dirty-looking woman sat hunched in the shadows, wrapped in an old, tattered coat. Her face was mostly hidden beneath a torn scarf, and her clothes were little more than rags. She looked like she had been invisible to the world for years, ignored by the passing crowds. Ethan smirked, tilting his head slightly before glancing back at his friends. "That's the one," he said, nodding toward the woman. Laughter erupted behind him, a mixture of disbelief and amusement. They nudged each other, waiting to see if he would actually go through with it. But Ethan didn't hesitate. With a self-assured grin, he stepped toward her, already planning his next move. Ethan takes a deep breath and walks toward the beggar woman, his expensive shoes clicking against the pavement. She doesn't look up, her thin arms wrapped around herself for warmth. The streetlights cast a dull glow on her ragged clothes and dirt-streaked hands. Ethan kneels beside her, ignoring the curious stares of people passing by. He tilts his head, smirking, and says, "Marry me." The woman stiffens. Slowly, she lifts her face just enough for her tired, wary eyes to meet his. Confusion, fear, and disbelief flash across her face. "Are you mocking me?" she asks in a low, hoarse voice. Ethan chuckles, shaking his head. "No joke. I'll give you money, food, and a place to live. All you have to do is marry me." She blinks rapidly, as if trying to decide whether this is a dream or a cruel trick. The hesitation. She pulls her torn scarf tighter around her face, eyeing him with suspicion. "Why me?" Ethan leans back, pretending to think. Then he shrugs and says with a smirk, "Because you have nothing to lose." Her fingers tighten around the dirty fabric of her coat. She doesn't know this man, but something about him unnerves her. His words are playful, but his eyes are unreadable. The woman glances at the people walking past them, ignoring her, just as they have every day of her life. If she says no, she will still be cold, hungry, and alone. If she says yes, she might finally escape this life of misery. After a long silence, she nods slowly. "I'll do it." Ethan smirks, standing up and pulling out his phone. He calls his driver and says, "Pick us up. I found my bride." The woman still doesn't know that she has just become part of a cruel bet. The wedding was nothing short of grand. A luxurious ballroom, golden chandeliers, and hundreds of high society guests filled the space. The tables overflowed with exotic flowers, champagne glasses, and gold-trimmed plates. Ethan stood at the altar, dressed in an expensive tuxedo, looking effortlessly confident. But beside him stood his bride, wrapped in the same tattered coat and scarf she wore on the street. She didn't fit in this world of wealth and power. She looked small, out of place, and painfully aware of the whispers around her. The guests exchanged side glances, barely hiding their smirks. "Is this a joke?" someone muttered. "The mighty Ethan Cole married a beggar? I've seen better-dressed servants." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Ethan didn't care. He smirked, keeping up his confident act, ignoring the feeling gnawing at the back of his mind. Ethan's inner conflict. For the first time, Ethan felt something unexpected, discomfort. Why did it suddenly bother him that they were laughing at her? Why did it feel wrong to let them mock her when she had done nothing to deserve it? The woman stood beside him, her face hidden beneath the scarf, her shoulders tense. She wasn't angry or sad, just silent, as if she had heard it all before. That bothered him even more. But before he could think about it too much, the priest's voice cut through his thoughts. "Do you take this woman as your wife?" Ethan paused for a fraction of a second, then smirked. "I do." The woman's voice was softer, but steady. "I do." The ceremony ended in applause, some polite, some mocking, but Ethan barely heard it. Later that night, they arrived at Ethan's penthouse, a massive suite overlooking the glittering city. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching as his new bride stood in the middle of the luxurious room. "All right," he said, smirking. "Let's see what I just married." He fully expected this to be a hilarious reveal. What he didn't expect was the shock of his life. Ethan leaned against the doorway of his penthouse suite, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. His new wife, still standing in the middle of the massive room, said nothing. The golden chandelier above cast a warm glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the city skyline beyond the towering windows. Ethan rolled his sleeves up, casually stepping forward. "All right," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Let's see what I just married." He expected a joke, a disaster, a moment he could laugh about later with his friends. But what happened next knocked the air out of his lungs. The woman reached up, her fingers trembling slightly as they grasped the edge of her scarf. Then, slowly, she pulled it away. The thin, torn fabric fluttered to the floor, revealing the face hidden beneath it. Ethan's smirk vanished. His entire body froze. Ethan's shock. The woman standing before him wasn't a beggar. She wasn't ugly. She was stunning. Her skin was flawless, glowing like porcelain beneath the warm lights. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, sharp and intelligent, locked onto his. Long, dark lashes framed them perfectly. Her lips, full, soft, naturally pink, curved slightly, as if waiting for his reaction. Even her posture had changed. No longer hunched or timid. She stood tall, confident, unshaken. Ethan's throat went dry. This wasn't just a pretty woman. This was the kind of beauty that stopped time, that could silence a room, that could make men forget how to breathe. And he had mocked her. He had paraded her around like a joke. His pulse hammered in his ears. Who the hell was she? Her true identity. As if reading his mind, the woman took a step closer, tilting her head slightly. "My name," she said, her voice smooth, steady, "is Isabel Lauron." Ethan's brows knitted together. The name tugged at something in his memory, something from the business world, from whispers of old money and power. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You think I was always a beggar?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You think I was always living on the streets?" Ethan didn't answer. She let the silence stretch before continuing. "I was once the heiress to the Lauron family fortune. My father owned hotels, resorts, real estate, one of the biggest empires in the country." Ethan's heart pounded. He knew that name, Lauron Enterprises. Once a business empire, but it had all collapsed overnight. The media had covered it nonstop for months. Betrayal, a family scandal, a missing heiress. Ethan's stomach dropped. He swallowed hard. "You disappeared. The world thought you were dead." Isabel gave a small, humorless laugh. "Not dead. Just discarded. Karma hits hard." Ethan's head was spinning. He had married her, a woman far beyond his own wealth and status, and he had treated her like a joke. And now he was the joke. He had dragged a woman of power and beauty into his cruel game, thinking she was beneath him. But the truth was, he wasn't worthy of her. Isabel watched his expression shift, her sharp green eyes never leaving his. "I didn't beg for this marriage," she said. "You chose me. You thought I was nothing." Ethan's jaw clenched. He had thought he was in control. But karma had flipped the game. Now he was the one trapped. The bet that had started as a joke was now his reality. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole didn't know what to do. Ethan stood frozen in his penthouse, watching as Isabel Lauron, his wife, the woman he had humiliated, walked out of his life. She didn't slam the door. She didn't throw insults. She just left. And somehow that hurt more than anything. The next morning, Ethan woke up to chaos. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His email inbox was flooded. The media had the story. Billionaire Ethan Cole's cruel marriage bet exposed. Rich playboy marries ugly beggar as a joke. But she's actually an heiress. Billionaire's marriage gamble backfires? Did he just lose everything? It was everywhere. The story had leaked overnight, spreading like wildfire. Every business newspaper, social media site, and news channel was talking about his twisted bet. And at the center of it all, his wife, the woman he had underestimated. Public humiliation. Ethan tried damage control. His PR team scrambled to bury the story, but it was too late. The world had already judged him. His business partners pulled away, canceling deals. Investors lost confidence in him. At events, people whispered behind his back. Even his closest friends, the ones who had laughed along with him at the bet, now distanced themselves, as if they weren't part of it too. The man who had once been admired, feared, and envied, was now a joke. And Isabel? She didn't say a word to the press. She disappeared again, leaving Ethan to drown in the mess he had created. The regret sets in. Days turned into weeks. Ethan stopped caring about business meetings. He stopped showing up at events. For the first time in his life, he was alone. The world he had built, his empire of wealth, power, and status meant nothing now. Because no matter how many drinks he had, no matter how much he tried to block it all out, he couldn't forget her. He couldn't forget the way she had stood tall even when the world mocked her. He couldn't forget the pain in her eyes when she realized what he had done. He couldn't forget that he had lost the only woman who had ever truly challenged him. And for what? A bet. A stupid, reckless bet. Ethan stared at his reflection in the mirror one night, disgusted by what he saw. This isn't who I want to be. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to change. The journey to redemption. Ethan knew that finding Isabel wouldn't be easy. She had disappeared before. She could do it again. But he had to try. Not as a billionaire. Not as a man who wanted to win. But as a man who had learned his lesson. With no press, no cameras, and no fancy suits, he searched for her. He visited old charity organizations she had supported before her family's downfall. He asked contacts in business circles if they had seen her. He even went back to the same streets where he had first found her, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she had returned. And then he found her. In a small coastal town, far from the city's flashing lights and luxury, Isabel was working at a community shelter, helping the very people he had ignored his entire life. Ethan stood at the entrance, watching her from a distance. She was smiling, genuinely happy, and for the first time he realized what true wealth looked like. Taking a deep breath, he walked toward her. She looked up and froze. Their eyes met. For the first time, Ethan didn't smirk. He didn't charm. He simply said, "I'm sorry," and for the first time in his life, he truly meant it. But the real question was, would she forgive him? Isabel stood still, watching Ethan carefully. Gone was the arrogant billionaire she had once married as part of his cruel bet. Now he stood before her with no expensive suit, no entourage, no smirk of confidence. Just a man who had lost everything, but seemed to have finally found himself. She crossed her arms. "Why are you here, Ethan?" His voice was quieter than she remembered. Honest. Because I needed to see you. Because I need to fix what I broke. Isabel studied him, her green eyes sharp. And how do I know this isn't another game to you? Ethan exhaled, his shoulders heavy with regret. I gave up my company, he admitted. Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she stayed silent. I sold everything. The business, the penthouse, the cars. I didn't want my money to define me anymore. I needed to know who I was without it. A beat of silence. Then, softly, he said, I needed to know if I could be someone you could respect. Love wins or karma wins. Isabel's heart twisted. This wasn't the man who had mocked her at the altar. This wasn't the man who had treated her as a joke. This was someone broken, humbled, but real. She sighed, looking away toward the horizon. What do you want from me, Ethan? Ethan hesitated before stepping closer. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that, he said. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. That I was wrong. About everything. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Isabel turned back to him and smiled. Not a smile of amusement. Not a smile of victory. A soft, genuine smile. You really sold everything? She asked. He nodded. And you came here to apologize, knowing I might not forgive you? Another nod. She let out a small laugh. You're crazier than I thought. Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. Maybe. Another pause. Then, Isabel took a deep breath and said something he never expected. Okay. Ethan blinked. Okay. What? She rolled her eyes. Okay. Let's see if you really changed. Ethan's chest tightened. Hope flickered in his heart for the first time in months. The conclusion. Ethan didn't win her back with money, power, or charm. He won her back by losing everything, except his willingness to change. And as they stood together in the golden glow of sunset, he realized. Love wasn't about bets or power. It was about becoming the kind of person worthy of it. And for the first time, Ethan Cole finally understood what that meant. And that brings us to the end of this incredible journey. Ethan thought he was in control, but karma had other plans. From arrogance to redemption, his story proves that sometimes the biggest lessons come from the most unexpected places. What do you think about Ethan's transformation? Did he truly deserve a second chance? Or should Isabel have walked away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to keep up with all our stories, and be sure to check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.